joins, we can bring them up to speed. Since I'm the staff liaison and we haven't elected any officers yet, I'll just call the meeting to order and welcome everybody. Happy Thursday. This is the second Places 29 North meeting, I think, for most of you here, so welcome. The first thing that I'll do is just run through our short agenda for tonight. We will ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes. And then we do have an item on the agenda for officer elections. And I do want to talk through a couple options that y'all have if you want to do elections this evening or do something in the interim. And finally, I have a presentation that follows up on last month's meeting about land use in the Places 29 area that I think will be helpful as an introductory presentation about the master plan. And that is all we have on the agenda. So moving on to the meeting minutes, those were sent in the email that everyone should have received on Monday. So did everyone have a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, they look good.
Great. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thanks.
Do we do that, or I don't know?
Really only for meeting minutes mostly, because we will post those to the Albemarle County website for reference. So that's helpful to know that there's a seat. Thank you, Tony. All right, and for officer elections, I have a few slides that it might be helpful to see as go ahead.
Do you have to ask all in favor?
For meeting minutes,
we have a motion and a second.
We can do that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So all in favor?
Yes.
Yes, aye. Okay.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Lepisto Kirtley. I don't do that very often, so.
That's okay.
So I'm going to share my screen and talk about the different officer positions that we have for community advisory committees. I did briefly talk about this last month, but wanted everyone to be able to see this again. So there is a chair for each community advisory committee that works with the staff liaison, which is me in this case, and often the board of supervisors member as well, to set the agenda and then preside over the meeting. So do what I'm doing right now, walking through the agenda and the minutes, etc. The vice chair is someone that typically steps in when the chair is not able to attend, and that's really the extent of that position. And then the secretary is a very important person who takes the meeting minutes that we upload to the county website each month. So those are the three elected positions. And before we get into voting procedures, I did talk to other neighborhood planning staff that I work with. And since many of you are new to the group, one thing we could do as an option is ask for a volunteer to step in as chair for a couple of months, as well as a secretary to step in for a couple of months. And we could do that interim approach as you all get used to the group, or we could do elections this evening if y'all are comfortable with that. I just did want to give that option since membership is new for you all. So feel free to talk about what you all would be comfortable with. And that's the intro from me.
Michaela, there were a few more people that were on the list. You know, I don't know if they, right now I forget the name of the person that had been on the committee. Do you know if he is still interested in being on the committee or not?
I haven't been able to reach Chris Scharnbeck, who was on the committee previously. So I've tried a couple of times. I'm happy to do that again. So I'm not sure what his plans are. And we do have Heather Stokes, who is currently an appointed member, who has not attended the December and this meeting. So there are two.
Okay.
This is not an appointed member currently.
Bill, do you know Chris? I don't really know.
No,
But if you
I-
anyone know him or have his number, I'll be happy to call him.
He's in, you might have a number for him. He has a company, or he's part of a development company, I believe. Is that right, Michaela?
I believe he works for Blue Ridge Bank, and I'm happy
Oh, okay.
to contact
Right.
Oh, okay.
with you.
Maybe I could coax him into coming back or staying.
She's good at that.
No, she
He's
is.
smiling, Janelle. I see that. And Jimmy.
I had sent an email to Michaela saying that since I did take the notes from the previous meeting, that I could possibly perform the role of secretary if no one else is willing to do that. I don't know shorthand, but I don't think I really need to do that, you know, so if that's acceptable to the other members of the committee, I'd certainly be willing to do that.
No objections from me.
Okay.
And Michaela, just wondering, are we doing, detail minutes or action minutes?
Action minutes, just
Okay.
high level notes of what was discussed and
Okay.
Right.
And what was decided? Okay.
yes.
Just really high level, I think. Hopefully, you know, I don't know how much detail we need to get into, but well, it's a question I have for later is that, you know, if we do advise I guess our role is really to advise the planning commission. And so if we do have a piece of advice that we're reach consensus on, I guess we should write that up. I mean, I would presume so. Otherwise, how would we communicate it to the
Right.
board and the planning commission?
Right, those would be action minutes. Anything
Okay.
you all take action on, either vote on or come to consensus on, then those are the things you'd want to write down. So let's say if you discuss all houses should be painted pink and you can't come to consensus and nobody agrees, you're not even going to put that in the minutes because it's not something, it's not something you took action on.
Well, yeah, but I like pink.
Okay, I move to dismiss Bill McLaughlin immediately.
No, I wouldn't, not all houses, no. Okay,
Yeah.
Bill, you look in the pink to me.
okay,
So, I mean, and that makes it easier on you, Bill.
right, just action.
Yeah, the ones we
Okay.
took action on.
Okay,
So does the group feel comfortable or would the group like to take a formal vote this evening on officer positions, or just I can ask for a volunteer chair, and if Bill wanted to be a volunteer secretary for a couple of months, we can check in and do this in March or April. What do you all prefer?
I think just for now, since we only seems like we have 3, you know, members other than the board liaison. I don't even know, do we really have a quorum or committee at this point?
You have 4 members and it's questionable whether or not Chris is a member. Well, no, actually 5 with Heather Stokes. So
So you have
it says no, and until Chris says no.
We
I
have
think
5,
just-
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
6 with Heather and Chris would be 6. Yeah.
yes.
Right, okay. All right,
So I'm hearing interim, Bill will take minutes for us, and would someone be willing to coordinate with me on agendas and act as the chair in the interim? I won't make it too difficult.
Well, if no one wants to do it, I would do it.
at least temporarily.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can check in March or April about this and do a formal vote. Perhaps
Okay.
there will be a couple more members at that point. Thanks for working through that as a just process piece.
Mhm.
So if it works for you all, I can move ahead to the land use and places 29 overview.
Okay.
Is that all right? Okay.
Do we need a motion for these interim, like Bill's secretary? Do we need a motion for that, or we're just going to, we're just going to be informal? And
Typically, the CACs that I've worked with haven't taken motions on things like that. I don't think it hurts by any means, but I don't think the group should feel obligated to do so.
B, do you have an opinion on that, or?
For that particular one, I noticed in the previous slide that Michaela showed, it said that nomination, you don't have to have a vote on for the chair
Okay,
or for the
great.
president. Yeah.
Okay,
chair.
we'll just say
That's
it's
a great
consensus.
Okay.
Okay.
Read.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Some of the slides will look familiar from last month, though I did want to include them since there's a lot of information in this presentation, and it's helpful to reiterate a couple of points about land use and zoning. So this is a presentation I put together along with other neighborhood planning staff that work with the Places 29 CACs. And this will be an overview of long-range planning practices at the county and the Places 29 master plan specifically. So as many of you know, the comprehensive plan is Albemarle County's 20-year visionary document
Right back.
that has overarching policies and recommendations. It contains master plans and small area plans, sort of acts like a nesting doll, for example, with including master plans and small area plans within it. And these are developed in collaboration and through extensive community engagement processes with community members, local organizations, nonprofits. A range of stakeholders help to create these documents based on and create this vision. Each development area has a master plan, and it contains future land use recommendations for every single property. So the Places 29 master plan is the one that reflects the Places 29 development area. It also, the Places 29 master plan includes the Rio 29 small area plan as well, which is a pretty recent document in that it was adopted in December of 2018. And this is an example of a page from the document, which shows how the planning work at Albemarle County has evolved over time. If you've looked at the Places 29 master plan, you'll see that it was adopted in 2011. And this small area plan, which was adopted in 2018, has more character and form recommendations for buildings and focuses on connected streets and building types in a way that is different than the Places 29 master plan does. And that's just a reflection of evolving planning practice and evolution of the department. So I just provided an overview of the comprehensive plan and long-range planning, which is important to note that it's different than zoning because zoning carries the force of law. It is not a recommendation like a long-range planning document. It dictates what a property owner can build and where. And you see zoning in most localities across the United States. It groups properties into different categories called zones that dictate the types of buildings and the uses that can occur within them. And as I mentioned, the zoning ordinance dictates what can be done, what we call by right today. So by right means that the property owners have the rights to do certain types of developments without going to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So staff reviews these applications administratively, meaning we look at the relevant policies locally and at the state level to make sure that their applications comply with them, but there's not discretion that occurs. And sometimes the zoning ordinance and the future land use designation maps don't line up. This is, obviously you can't see all of the details here, but the Albemarle County zoning ordinance was adopted in 1980. It's been adopted it's been updated in different ways since then, but not comprehensively. So since the adoption of the zoning ordinance, we've been doing long-range plans and have future recommendations for properties. Sometimes these don't line up to existing zones. So how is the future land use plan used by decision makers? We talked about this in our last meeting a bit, in that the first phase of the development review process for folks that want to do a type of development that they're not currently permitted to do is going through the legislative review process. So they can submit a special use permit or what's called a rezoning or a zoning map amendment to do something different than what's currently permitted on their property. This requires not only staff review and staff putting together a report, it requires the Planning Commission to provide a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and it is reviewed by the Board of Supervisors for approval or denial. So this graphic is here to show you that if someone is seeking to do something that the zoning ordinance doesn't allow by right, this is the first phase of the development review process. And I talked through that on the last slide. But what's important here is that the master plans and the future land use designations within them are what's used by staff to, alongside a range of factors, but this is a key factor that staff use in their report provided to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So go ahead.
Can we have a question?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Where does a property owner find out the current uses for their land in each category?
An easy way to do that is the county has a mapping website that it's our GIS viewer, where you can type in an address and you can see the zoning and the future land use, as well as a lot of other property attributes. So I can send you the link for that, and I'm happy to show you all how to use that as well. It's an easy tool to be able to see not only what's on your own property, but others around you as well.
Well, do you find that some people go ahead and do what they want to do and then face the issue later, or do people seek to know what rights they have?
I think typically we see people for rezonings and special use permits going through this legislative process, because we do have zoning compliance and code compliance officers that if their development is not consistent with the zoning ordinance, they could face repercussions for not abiding by their currently permitted rights. So I don't hear about that as much, but I also do not work, I'm not a code compliance officer, and they would probably have a different opinion. So.
But these usage in each designation is available. If my neighbor is building a pig pen next door, I mean, I can find out what his rights are on his property, right?
Yes, you'd be able to see what zoning district it is, and then you can look at the Albemarle County zoning ordinance and look at that district, and it has a list of uses. Some districts have more form elements as well about building height and other aspects like building footprint, but yes, you can certainly see that.
Floodplains also?
Sorry? Yes.
Floodplains also, okay.
Yes.
So, Michaela, I would like you to send us that link, and maybe we could try it on our own to see if we can manipulate it. And if we have trouble, we could contact you, or that could be something for the next meeting.
Sure, and
Also, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
if we have time, I can show you where the link is, just share my screen and show you the very basics of it, and then you could explore it further. And I can address any questions you might have.
All right, and also it might be helpful if you sent us your slides here.
Yes, I'll do that.
Just for us to review that.
Yes, I will send you the link to our GIS web, this PowerPoint, and then also the master plan document so that you can review all of those. The Places 29 master plan is the longest one that the county has, so that's a heads up.
Okay,
It's
is that
long.
because it's the newest?
It is not the newest. The Pantops master plan is the newest
Oh,
master plan we've worked on, adopted in 2019. Yeah.
thank you.
Michaela, just to reiterate, you said that the zoning is, that's basically the law, so you can be fined if you don't follow with the zoning code. But the master plan is something more of a guideline or suggestion.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for reiterating that. It's a series of recommendations and it's criteria that staff review against for proposals that come before the Planning Commission and the board, but it does not carry the force of law.
And I wanted to let everyone know that is present that going back, I don't know, Michaela, if it's 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, zoning laws were passed, but also master plan developments were put in place. And like Michaela said, it's very important to realize they don't always coincide. So therefore you'll get people saying, well, the master plan says you can't do that. Well, first of all, it's a recommendation, but also it may be in direct conflict with the zoning or vice versa. So I think it's important that as supervisors, we are looking to somehow trying to fast track, and when I mean fast track, a year or two to kind of get the two that match, because it's not fair to homeowners, it's not fair to developers, it's not fair to, you know, our all of our land use decisions. I just wanted to, but I just wanted to make that clear. You'll be facing some interesting choices.
Thank you. All right, I'll move along, but feel free to jump in with questions as we move through this. We have a small group, so it makes it really easy to do this. So this portion of my presentation is moving into the Places 29 master plan. As I mentioned, this was adopted in 2011 and was revised in 2015 alongside, this was the same year that the comprehensive plan was updated in the county, so this was a part of that. Generally, each of the county's master plans incorporate several of the same sections. There's high-level vision statements and guiding principles that are intended to shape the rest of the plan. There's existing conditions and analysis, future land use plan, which we've already talked about quite a bit. There's also a future transportation network plan, as well as a future parks and green systems plan. And then typically they conclude with prioritized implementation projects that seek to support those future plans. This is obviously hard to see all of the parcels on your screen, but I have this before you just to see an example of what a future land use map looks like. The Places 29 area is actually too long to show on your screen. So this is the north end, and I have it here before you because this is the area that is reflected by the Places 29 North group. And just in looking at this, it's helpful to know that Each property is designated a future land use category, which is all the different colors on the map. And with each of those categories is a range of recommended uses, building forms, and in some case, site design elements. I'm not going to get into each of the parcels and the map placements this evening. We thought as staff it would be helpful to talk about the land use categories first so that you all could understand what is recommended for each of the categories. And then if this is helpful as a presentation in a future meeting, we could dive into the land use map and where they're applied. Later this evening, I'll talk about how the planning methods have evolved and how some of the recommendations in the Places 29 master plan differ from a newer plan like Pantops. And that's just a reflection of newer plans, and as we update them, how planning methodologies evolve. So again, this is just like a brief preview to you that this is what a future land use map looks like. And I'll send you the link so that you can look at it more closely. This is a page that is in the Places 29 master plan that is unique for this master plan. It designates a series of centers, and there's unique recommendations for the centers. As you can see on the top of the screen, there's this range of centers that increase in scale and intensity. So a neighborhood service center is primarily focused on providing neighborhood services. So there's retail and commercial uses permitted in small footprints, but then the centers increase in intensity to what's called in the Places 29 master plan as the uptown, which has a higher density of multifamily units, more robust retail, commercial, and office uses allowed there. So this is meant to show you all how there's this tiered approach of different scales of centers that are used in the Places 29 master plan. There are some photos here that these are not from Places 29, but are shown here to demonstrate that we use these center designations across the county. So on the left side of your screen is Riverside Village in Pantops that is designated as a neighborhood center. And on the right side of your screen is Old Trail in Crozet, and this is a newer designation that we've included since the adoption of Places 29 called a village center. So these are the types of different scales. So in Riverside Village, there's a coffee shop, first floor, commercial, and residences above. There's not a huge amount of commercial space, and the village center has more of these commercial spaces, and it extends. Sorry, my screen froze. And then as we increase in intensity, these are not all local. So another example at the top left of the screen here is in Crozet, and that's a town center. This is downtown Crozet, the central gathering space of Crozet. And the lower left side of your screen is an urban center. This is actually a photo from Bethesda, Maryland. There's taller buildings, higher density of apartments, and there's transit here provided as well. On the right side of your screen is a regional center that is Columbia Pike in Arlington. And you can tell that there is this civic space that is shared and again, increase in density. So there are specific recommendations in the Places 29 master plan that you can we can talk about and discuss, and you can review, though I just wanted to give you all some photos to be able to see kind of what the intention behind these center designations is and how they grow in intensity. So the Places 29 master plan also has tables for land uses that are around centers. And the way to read this chart, because I realize it can be a bit challenging if you haven't looked at it before, is that the colors at the top of the table reflect the colors on the land use map. And as you read it, you can see within an urban mixed use designation, different types of uses that are recommended. And so in some cases, for example, urban density residential, auto commercial sales and service are not permitted within that recommendation. So again, something that is important to acknowledge is that this is not permitted, but overall, as Supervisor Lepisto currently said, these are recommendations. This is the future land use plan, the vision. Bill, were you about to ask a question or say something?
No.
Okay. Sorry.
So now, well, I will. So now is this the case where even though this plan might say not permitted, if you go to the actual zoning, like it could be something different and say it could potentially be in there based on the law? No?
Yes, you could see a situation where you're looking at the future land use map, you see something that says in the future, this should be urban density residential, but there is auto commercial sales and service there, and that's not consistent with the future plan. So it's always helpful to compare them side by side when, especially if there are community meetings that come before the committee in looking at, is this consistent with the future land use plan? Is it not?
What if they're already there?
If they're already, yes, they're already present and not consistent. There's nothing that we would do about that as staff. This is just a factor that we review when they might submit a special use permit or a rezoning application. So things that can exist inconsistent with the master plan. It's until they seek to do something different with their property that this kind of information is triggered.
I got you.
This is more of the same table. There's just additional land uses on the left side. So when you look at the master plan document, I'll send you the link. There are these 3 tables, and I often refer to these, sorry, just skipped around. There are those 3 tables of the centers and then this extended list of areas around centers that may be helpful to look at. So I'll talk through really quickly each of the categories so that you all are familiar with when you see one of these categories, what is recommended, what you might expect. To urban mixed use, which on your last screen is that red color, lighter red color, is recommended to have a density of 3 to 34 units an acre. And unique to this master plan, go ahead.
Michaela, I'm sorry to jump in right here, but as supervisors, we're also looking at that density because you can imagine from 3 all the way up to 34 units an acre, that's a huge jump, okay? So we're looking at that, perhaps working with the planning unit to maybe have different categories within that. So because 3 to 34, if a developer goes in there, they're going to think, oh, I can put 34 units on this acre, and maybe it's not going to work or not appropriate. So we're trying to help the developers by maybe having it into other sections, like maybe, I'm guessing, I don't know, 3 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 34. See what I mean? So that it's more reasonable, because if we want to limit what can go in there, if it says 3 to 34, we can't. So we haven't done it yet. That's something we're looking into. Thank you. Sorry.
That's helpful. And you reminded me that density might be a new term to the group, and density refers to the number of units that are on typically 1 acre is how the measurement is done. So large single family lots can be 1 dwelling unit an acre.
I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. But that's where that calculation comes from. And the urban mixed use land use designation for Places 29 is unique in that there's minimum percentage of developments allocated to specific uses. We haven't incorporated that into more recent master plans because it can be limiting at times to have these specific percentages of uses, but that is something that is currently in the Places 29 master plan. And as you can see, for each of these categories, there's typically building footprints and building heights specified that are recommended. So for urban mixed use, there's smaller auto commercial sales and service. And then there are larger building footprints for office, research and development, and other uses. So I probably won't read everything on this screen for the interest of time, but I think these are some examples of urban mixed use in the Places 29 area. We have Stonefield on the upper, actually all of these slides here are from Stonefield, and the upper left is the commercial retail space, probably most of you are familiar with. On the right is Stonefield Commons, which is an apartment building. And then the rendering on the bottom is a building that's currently under construction in Stonefield that will have 20,000 square feet of office space on the first floor, and then apartments on the upper floors. It has a special exception for an additional story of height. So that's why you'll see it will differ from this land use recommendation.
Let me ask a question about the acreage. If a developer's got 10 acres of land and 5 of it is a swamp, is that calculated into his availability there? I mean, for apartments or whatever, or units?
That's a good question. So there are two ways that you might hear people refer to density. There's density when you're looking at the site without any environmental features. But if there are significant environmental features on the site, that is typically a developer could calculate the density to exclude those resources from their developable area. Supervisor Lepisto-Kirtley, is there anything that you feel like would be helpful for the group to know about that? I feel like there's nuance in the development review process, and I don't know.
Oh, yes. Well, there's also the floodplain. So let's say you have 10 acres and half of it is in a floodplain, and you won't be allowed to develop or build in that floodplain, especially if it's a commercial entity. I'm not sure about residential, but probably the same, but I'm not sure about that. But I do know for commercial, if you want to have some kind of a business, you're not going to be allowed to build in a floodplain. So that's going to take away that acreage. But actually, when you ask that, Jimmy, that's an excellent question. So does the developer, if they can only build on 5 acres, count it as 5 acres or 10 acres, as far as density?
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure about that. I would think 5, but I don't know. Do you know, Michaela?
So there's 2 different calculations, gross versus net, that you'll sometimes hear. And hopefully I don't mix these up. Carolyn's probably here to back me up if I do, but gross is, across the entire site, where you would just treat the site as a blank slate and say, this is the amount of acreage and these are the units. And net would be considered without excluding any place that someone couldn't develop. And I think this comes up in the development review process when forms of development might look different when someone concentrates, 10 units on the front of their site versus across the site. And so that's a factor that the Planning Commission and the board review, though I can potentially get back to you all if there's any additional clarity I should provide.
Yeah, if you could email all of us, you have our email address, and just let us know if you, like Jimmy said, if you have 10 acres and 5 of it is in the swamp or undevelopable, do you then count, is the net 5 acres for density, or can you include the whole 10 acres for density but only build that density on the 5 acres. Also, Jimmy, there's a lot of green space. So they may not have a swamp, but they'll use it for green space if it's not buildable.
Mm-hmm.
Good questions. And I have my running list, so it won't be forgotten. The next category I have to share with you all is urban density residential. So this is different from the last category in that residential is the primary use. There is this range of recommended density from 6 to 34 units, and the master plan recommends 2 or more housing types. So rather than a large development with only apartments and townhomes, or townhomes and duplexes, or perhaps even more than 2 is recommended. Retail and institutional uses. So institutional is something like schools or fire stations. Those are considered secondary land uses in that they're not the primary use that you would see on a property, but they are consistent. They work well with residential uses. And as is probably no surprise, things like light industrial and heavy manufacturing are not permitted in these areas. They're generally not seen as consistent with places that people live next door to. And office, research and development, and flex spaces are recommended only by special exception. They're really encouraged to locate in the centers of activity. Supervisor Lepisto Kirtley just mentioned open space, and that is something that's recommended in each of these categories with proximity to residential developments. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that quite yet. So open space is recommended within 1/4 mile of residential areas, and they're recommended to include active recreational areas, usable open space, and urban density residential in particular might have greenways and trails through urban areas as well.
Well, let me ask a question. Does the county have to abide by its own zoning laws? For instance, what's the zoning designation for a school?
So that is typically institutional, and yes, the county needs to abide by its own policy, the zoning ordinance as well. Yes. So these images on the screen are, you might recognize Abington Place on the right, and the image on the left is right across the street on Timberwood Boulevard. This is really close to, it's along the edge of a center, though I wanted to include these images because they demonstrate what 2 housing types next to each other might look like and how a small scale commercial space might be incorporated into a residential development. So there's some commercial and office space on the first floor of Abington Place. Neighborhood density residential is lower density. You'll see there's a significant change in the recommended density to 3 to 6 units. Again, 2 or more housing types are preferred with a maximum 3-story building height recommended. Again, there are things that are typically not viewed as consistent with residential developments like light industrial, warehousing, distribution, and heavy manufacturing that are not recommended to be in these areas. And then retail and institutional uses are recommended with the maximum square footprints that building footprints that you see on your screen. The same language about open space is also included in the category. These are some examples you might recognize as well: Forest Lakes on the left and a home in Hollymead on the right. So you might see in this neighborhood density residential, you might see some duplexes as well as single family homes. Commercial mixed use is another land use category, moving away from the residential categories. So retail is considered a primary use in this land use category, along with commercial sales and service, office, research and development. And you'll see that maximum building footprints and building heights are recommended as well for these areas. The main things that aren't permitted are heavy manufacturing, storage and distribution, and warehousing and distribution. Examples of commercial uses here are Rivanna Plaza on the left. That's the shopping center that has the Bolero, bowling alley, and Doctopia. On the right is Seminole Commons at Forest Lakes. It has a mixture of commercial, office, and then self-storage in the rear. So those are some examples of that land use. Office, research and development, flex, and light industrial are land uses that the ones that are listed in the title really are those primary land uses we recommend to see in the area. Though retail, auto, commercial, sales and service, and warehousing and distribution are also recommended. What's unique for this land use is that residential is considered secondary and is recommended to be located on upper stories. There's again an open space recommendation for this as well. And UVA Research Park is an example of this future land use designation. Light industrial, as it says in the title, is primary land uses recommended for this area are light industrial, manufacturing, storage and distribution, as well as warehousing and distribution. Retail uses are only recommended by special exception with some provisions about maximum square building footprints, and residential and heavy manufacturing are not recommended for this area. A difference in the open space recommendation here is that it's recommended for within half a mile of businesses. The other categories you've seen so far have stated within a quarter mile of residences and businesses. So it's sort of saying a bit further away is acceptable. And then on your left, this is the Crutchfield Corporation expansion, and on the right is Airport Road Industrial Park. So these are examples of light industrial future land uses. Heavy industrial, I think probably is fairly straightforward to the group, but the primary land uses in this category are heavy manufacturing, warehousing, light industrial manufacturing is also recommended, but residential is not recommended for these areas, and retail only as part of a showroom in a building or with a maximum square building footprint of 10,000 square feet by special exceptions. So this is an example along North Side Drive, Hall's Auto Body. That area is considered heavy industrial. And the last category I have is open space, which has been included throughout the other categories. And I included the text from the Places 29 master plan here because open space is used broadly to reflect many things, including private open spaces for neighborhoods, public parks, environmental features that we've talked about, like floodplain areas and steep slopes, as well as active recreational areas and plazas. And these are examples of different open spaces. We've actually updated and revised our way of classifying open space into two categories in recent master plans: parks and green systems that reflect locations that are private parks or part of the environmental features. And then we have a second category, public parks. So on the left of your screen is Old Mills Trail, part of the parks and green systems. And then public parks is shown on the right with, this is Darden Tow, the Lewis and Clark Center. So I walked through a bunch of information about Places 29. And since this plan was adopted in 2011 and we've done more recent master plans, I wanted to quickly show you all what the Pantops master plan looks like and how some of the approach has evolved. So this is an updated table with center categories, and Pantops has different centers designated as urban centers, neighborhood service, and employment districts. So those, it's a reduced amount from the Places 29 master plan, and there's this category employment district that refers to areas that provide jobs. It has secondary residential and commercial uses, but it's really an employment generating area. And this is what a land use table looks like in the Pantops master plan. And the things to note about it are that there's more specific building and form guidance, moving a bit away from building footprints and more toward, there still is that information there, but more towards things like block lengths and height of buildings and how buildings meet the street as opposed to mainly building footprints. And these are some diagrams that are shown in that master plan to demonstrate some different categories. We've incorporated more urban design guidance in more recent master plans, and there's updated mixed use categories. There's community mixed use and commercial mixed use. So that concludes most of my presentation. If this continues to be of interest and value to the group, we could at a future meeting talk about the land use map specifically and look at how these categories are applied. I also did want to note that it is in the community development work program for our staff to do a comprehensive plan update. And part of the work of the comprehensive plan will likely be creating land use categories that are that can be applied consistently across master plans. Right now, you'll see slightly different categories across master plans just due to their age and evolution of the planning process and methods over time. So I will stop there, and if you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. That is all I have.
Well, I want to thank you. It was very helpful. But you will send those slides to us so we could look them over.
Yes, there's lots of
I had
information.
no idea how involved all of this was. So it's interesting.
Bill, you're muted, though I can tell you have a comment or question.
What are the boundaries of Places 29?
I can pull up a map for you, but essentially at the city county boundary that is along 29, and between Barracks Road and Stonefield is the south boundary. And then as we briefly saw on the map of the north side, it's past, here, I'll just share my screen so you can see this north boundary. So this is the north boundary, and it will be helpful when I send along a map for you to see that the boundaries to the north and south of Route 29.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings up I talked about this in our last meeting briefly, but the county's growth management policy is one that designates certain areas as development areas and other areas as rural areas. So 5% of the county's land is designated as a development area. And the idea behind that growth management policy is that growth is concentrated in those development areas as an environmental preservation land use tool. So that is, the land use colors are within that area because that's a development area.
Yeah, my question, I think I'm unmuted now, was in the densities, when you're saying 3 to 6, are you requiring at least 3 units per acre, or can it be fewer than 3?
Recommended to be at least 3. The idea is that That is the minimum expectation.
So no, so the largest lot in those designated areas would be 1/3 of an acre, according to recommendations.
It could be 2 houses on 1/2 an acre, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what you're saying is in those areas, there are no 1 acre lots or 1/2 acre lots.
that's
The
not what's
maximum
recommended.
lot
Yeah.
is 1/3 of an acre.
Yes.
Okay. So that, okay,
And these are recommendations again. You'll probably
right.
see
That's
things that
the
are different.
recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I did have a general question in terms of the committee. I guess I'm kind of looking for, what kind of advice you're looking for from an advisory committee. What kind of things are we supposed to advise you about? Like for instance, Dee mentioned the more categorized density levels. Like, would you be looking for advice from these committees on that sort of thing as to what the gradations of density should be?
Generally, so there are community meetings for projects that are under review for special use permits and rezonings. And if they're in the Places 29 North area, the applicant will likely have a community meeting with this group, and neighbors are also invited. And that's one type of project that is helpful for this group to provide feedback on. Connectivity is a big one throughout a site. Uses, mixture of uses and building forms. That feedback is summarized and included in the staff report that goes to the Planning Commission and the board. So that's one type. There's also ongoing projects different projects that happen at the county. A recently adopted project, the Climate Action Plan, is an example of that process. Worked with CACs for feedback. As well as the Rio 29 Small Area Plan, worked with the Places 29 Rio CAC pretty closely. So as we move into the comprehensive plan update process, the CAC can provide feedback and insight and be involved in that process as well. It's also ranged from CAC to CAC, I will say, based on priorities as well. I hope that helps, though.
May I ask a question about the connectivity program? Now, we've had over years, a family buys a house on a dead end street, and later down the road, a development takes place behind it, and all of a sudden they want connectivity through there, which eliminates a lot of activity, community activities, children playing and so forth. It sounds like a Johnny come lately plan to me. Tell me, defend it for me.
So these master plan documents, I don't have an image in my slide now, but there is a future connectivity plan that maps out how roads should ideally connect to one another in the future. And I think there's a few arguments toward, just hypothetically, towards connecting streets rather than having cul-de-sacs. Is that from a emergency services standpoint, having several cul-de-sacs can make it hard to quickly and efficiently reach homes if you have one in and in out of neighborhoods. Also diverting traffic off of some roads and providing multiple avenues for people to travel to and from places is another just like high level rationale for connecting streets. So I think typically from a planning standpoint, we like to connect streets in a safe manner that provides opportunities for walkers and bikers and cars. Though I live on a cul-de-sac, I know that kids play in the cul-de-sac. I hear your point entirely.
Yeah, I just one comment on that an unintended consequences of having a lot of connectivity, say parallel to say Route 29, is that what happens is if Route 29 becomes congested, then commuters have a tendency to find and create bypasses through the connected roads, which creates, in my experience in the Washington DC area, you know, some really bad traffic hazards, in a sense that, you know, commuters are then, instead of going on the main roads, they're going through residential areas with very narrow streets and a lot of residential. And then what happens after that is then those neighborhoods want to put in, you know, speed bumps and so forth and so on to discourage that. So it's kind of a something you have to be very careful about in terms of not creating alternative routes for commuters that weren't intended, where the streets weren't intended to be commuter pathways.
Yeah, right. I'm hearing you say the capacity of the streets are really important as a factor in that. Definitely. I'll send along, I think the Rio 29 small area plan as a more updated plan does a good job of categorizing streets as boulevards and avenues and local streets. So thinking about capacity and what a street can handle and how they integrate with one another. Yes.
And Bill, just from your point of view, and I totally understand what you're saying, as new developments are coming up, we do ask that the streets within a development that development is just not a huge cul-de-sac, but that development does connect to other streets so that people inside that development, let's say even kids, can ride their bikes to different areas without having to go out onto 29, let's say.
Right. Well, that's,
yeah, so that's one of the benefits. You know, nothing is perfect, of course. Like Michaela was saying, just from the point of view of the fire department, we have some very large trucks. And if you get into a small cul-de-sac, you're in big trouble if you want to turn around or anything like that. So it also involves safety, but they really look at connectivity so that people who live in a development can go back and forth within that without having to go out onto a main boulevard to get to the other end or to another development. So, I mean, that,
okay. Yeah, it's just,
yeah.
you know, there's always a balancing act.
Yes, but I do know exactly what you're talking about in DC. I got stuck in DC this summer going to Maryland, and it was a real cluster. Yeah, it was awful, but yes.
Okay. Okay. You know, I did go through the Places 29 plan, the one that we now have, and I noticed there was a lot of reliance on public transportation that never seemed to materialize. And I'm not sure that in future plans, we need to think about how much public transportation is actually going to be available as opposed to, you know, what we would like to have, you know, in terms of what can the county afford, what can the state afford, you know, and you know, how many people are going to be comfortable using public transportation. So it's one of the things that I noticed about the Places 29 plan that I thought was a little bit, maybe assumptions were made that never really panned out, you know, so to speak. And, you know, if a developer is saying, well, we can put this many houses in this place because the county plans to bring bus service, well, plans are one thing, but reality is another thing. So that's a consideration.
I also serve on the Regional Transit Authority. And yes, that is a concern, especially now with the pandemic. But we're looking into alternative type, like with John, who services people with ADA. But we're also looking into having an on-demand service, which we think would fit the rural areas more so. and use the larger buses up and down 29. And hopefully any have bus stops along 29, but in a curved out area in a development. But the main, our biggest employers are UVA and the county. So if you have transportation going north to south along 29 to those areas, that's going to be huge. Or some place like Southwood, when that gets fully built, it would be very beneficial to have bus service from Southwood, that's where we have a lot of our essential workers. And that would be very good to have that. And by the way, Southwood has started, but it's going to take about 10 years to get fully built.
Is Southwood, I'm not familiar with that. Is,
Okay, if
And-
you go, yeah, 5th Street Extended.
okay, so that's on the other side of the city.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's 5th Street Extended. If you keep going south past the, where the elections office is,
Right, right,
it's on the left-hand side. It's a huge, huge mobile home park
right.
with septic systems, and that's all going to be cleared out one by one and put in sewer and apartments. And it's a really good enterprise between Habitat for Humanity and the county. The fact that it's all being redone and giving livable, nice housing for our essential workers.
Yeah, my neighbor's work is a habitat person.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have.
Yeah, I have no further questions.
Well, if there's no further questions or comments, we can adjourn. I will send along many of the materials that were referenced. I have my list, and Tony, I will coordinate with you about the February meeting
Fine.
as our volunteer acting chair. And Bill, whenever you have minutes, feel free to send them to me
Okay.
and I'll share with the group.
Great, thank you.
Well, have a good
So do we
evening.
need a motion to adjourn?
No,
Do
I
we
don't.
need a motion
Now
to
we can
adjourn?
just,
Okay,
No.
thank you.
bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you
Thank you,
very
Michaela.
much. Thank you.